Routine lunch protocol. A 20-minute operational blind spot inside the most fortified island prison in Southeast Asia. 198 heavily malnourished prisoners. 0 firearms. A survival probability mathematically calculated at absolute 0. Yet this exact chronological loophole dismantled the billion-dollar Con Dao penitentiary infrastructure on December 12, 1952. The French colonial administration built a fortress of concrete and high-density steel. They equipped it with naval warships. They installed heavy artillery batteries along the coastline. They established a strict visual patrol perimeter covering every millimeter of the compound. They believed geography was their ultimate warden. Con Dao Island sat isolated in the middle of the unforgiving East Sea. Hundreds of miles of violent ocean currents formed an inescapable liquid wall. The system was designed to be physically impenetrable. Warden Jardy operated this mechanical beast with absolute arrogance. He relied entirely on the structural superiority of his facility and the lethal force of his munitions. He failed to account for a microscopic flaw in his own operational matrix. The guards adhered to a rigid cyclic routine dictated by biological needs. Every single day at precisely 12 p.m., the patrol protocol shifted. Weapons were slung over shoulders. Attention diverted to military rations. The ratio of active armed personnel to prisoners dropped significantly. This was not a physical breach of the concrete walls. This was a psychological blind spot embedded in the schedule. A recurring 20-minute window of systemic paralysis. Deep inside the maximum security cells, the prisoners mapped this anomaly with terrifying precision. The underground leadership, known as the Island Committee, initiated a highly classified counter-protocol. Inmate Anba analyzed the guard deployment grid. He calculated the exact physical distance between the hard labor zones and the centralized armory. The margin of error was 0. A kinetic revolt required immediate access to high-velocity projectiles. The prisoners had none. They initiated a brutal process of resource conversion. In the pitch-black confinement of the cells, they scavenged discarded materials. Rusted iron scraps stripped from the architecture, broken wooden broom handles. They applied constant physical friction against the abrasive stone floors. They transformed harmless debris into lethal kinetic instruments. Every single millimeter of sharpened metal was a calculated variable in their survival equation. The acoustic signature of the continuous grinding was systematically masked by the ambient noise of the ocean waves crashing against the island walls. Simultaneous to the weapon manufacturing inmate, Van executed a complex meteorological analysis. Escaping the facility was only phase 1 of the equation. Crossing the East Sea required precise environmental alignment. Van tracked the lunar cycle without any instruments. He monitored the micro-fluctuations in the tidal patterns. He calculated the velocity and vector of the northeast monsoon winds rapidly approaching in December. He synchronized the prison revolt timeline with the optimal atmospheric conditions. The entire operation was a synchronized time bomb ticking down to a specific geographical coordinate: Ben Dam Bay. The French guards unknowingly facilitated the final stage of the setup. On the morning of December 12, they transported the 198 prisoners to the Ben Dam sector for intensive hard labor. The prisoners were physically depleted. Their biological caloric levels were critically low after months of starvation. They were facing armed guards positioned in elevated watchtowers with clear lines of sight. The tactical disadvantage was overwhelmingly in favor of the colonial forces. But the prisoners had positioned their microscopic variables perfectly across the board. The sharpened iron tools were concealed within their rags. The wind vectors were aligning exactly as predicted. The chronometer was ticking towards the critical 12 p.m. blind spot. The guards perceived only broken men breaking solid rocks. They failed to see a synchronized biological machine ready to exert maximum kinetic force at a singular pressure point. The system was entirely unaware that its structural integrity was about to experience a catastrophic collapse. The sun reached its absolute zenith. The ambient temperature peaked, causing thermal fatigue. The physical exhaustion of the morning shift settled into the muscles of the guards. They actively anticipated the lunch bell. Their physical grip on their standard-issue rifles loosened by fractions of an inch. Their visual scanning frequency decreased dramatically. The perimeter defense grid effectively deactivated for the midday transition. Inmate Salbua monitored the exact angle of the sun to track the time. He assessed the spatial distribution of every single guard in the immediate vicinity. He measured the physical distance to the primary target, the weapons cache. The mechanical equation was finalized. The variables were permanently locked in place. The billion-dollar infrastructure was now entirely dependent on the reaction time of a few distracted men. The chronological trigger was about to be pulled. The suffocating silence of the island was the final deep breath before a massive kinetic rupture. 12:20 p.m. The lunch bell vibrated through the humid air of Ben Dam. The acoustic signal initiated the systemic collapse. French guards unslung their MAS 36 bolt-action rifles. They lowered their weapons to the ground. The physical distance between their hands and the triggers increased to over 1 meter. This was the exact vulnerability the Island Committee had calculated. Sabua executed the primary kinetic strike. His muscular output bypassed the severe caloric deficit. He covered the 15-meter gap to the nearest guard in under 3.2 seconds. He generated maximum blunt force trauma using a concealed wooden rod. The guard collapsed before his neurological system could register the impact. The chain reaction instantly accelerated. 198 prisoners moved as a single synchronized kinetic entity. They abandoned their forced labor stations. They swarmed the guard perimeter. The crude iron shanks manufactured in the cells penetrated French uniforms. The tactical advantage inverted in less than 60 seconds. The guards failed to transition from a state of relaxation back to a combat-ready stance. The cognitive delay was fatal. Anba directed the primary assault vector straight toward the central armory. The reinforced wooden doors were breached using sheer mechanical force. The prisoners extracted the high-velocity firearms. They seized standard-issue rifles. They confiscated boxes of 7.5mm ammunition. The raw kinetic energy of the revolt successfully overrode the static defense grid of the facility. The communication lines to the main administrative hub were physically severed. The copper cables were cut. The electrical signals transmitting distress codes were permanently interrupted. The French command center remained entirely blind to the localized violent rupture occurring at Ben Dam. The prisoners immediately shifted to Phase 2 of the operational matrix. The extraction protocol. They sprinted toward the naval docking sector. Moored at the wooden pier were several transport vessels, 2 motorized canoes, 3 heavy wooden supply boats. The aquatic vehicles were engineered to carry a maximum payload of approximately 20 to 30 personnel each. The structural displacement parameters were rigidly defined by naval architects. The prisoners deliberately ignored these physical limitations. 198 individuals forced their biological mass onto the small fleet. The total weight exceeded the structural buoyancy thresholds by over 300%. The wooden hulls sank deep into the waterline. The water displaced by the overloaded vessels reached within 2 inches of the top rails. The center of gravity became dangerously unstable. Any sudden lateral movement threatened to capsize the boats instantly. The 2 mechanical engines of the canoes sputtered into ignition. The internal combustion generated a desperate thrust against the ocean current. The 3 wooden boats were tethered to the motorized units using thick hemp ropes. The tension on the tow lines reached critical stress levels. The fibers stretched under the massive drag coefficient of the overloaded wooden hulls. The makeshift flotilla slowly detached from the Ben Dam pier. They breached the initial naval perimeter. The prison alarms finally shrieked across the island. The physical severance of the communication lines only delayed the inevitable response. The colonial forces recognized the catastrophic breach. The naval pursuit protocol was activated. Heavy French patrol cruisers powered up their diesel engines. The steel warships possessed a maximum velocity of 25 knots. The overloaded prisoner boats moved at a fraction of that speed. The mathematical probability of extraction was rapidly shrinking. The physical distance between the escapees and the pursuing artillery was closing by the minute. The prisoners had successfully dismantled the concrete and steel infrastructure of the prison, but they were now trapped on a volatile liquid surface. They were entirely exposed to the superior mechanical firepower of the French Navy. The escape vectors were narrowing. The ocean offered no cover. The pursuing warships calculated the firing trajectories. The heavy naval guns locked on to the slow-moving wooden targets. The prisoners braced for high explosive impacts, but Van the inmate who calculated the meteorological variables looked at the sky. The atmospheric pressure was dropping at an unnatural rate. The temperature of the ocean surface plummeted. The wind velocity spiked from 15 to over 60 kilometers per hour in less than 20 minutes. The calculated anomaly had arrived. The northeast monsoon intersected directly with a massive tropical depression.
The thermodynamic clash triggered an immediate and violent atmospheric explosion. The EC transformed into a chaotic kinetic meat grinder. The tropical storm was not a miscalculation. It was their designated shield. The towering waves and cyclonic winds physically blocked the French pursuit. The heavy patrol cruisers struggled to maintain stability. The massive displacement of the steel ships made them vulnerable to the 50-foot swells. The French artillery batteries became useless. The chaotic elevation changes and the dense wall of rain completely blinded their optical targeting systems. Firing a precise ballistic trajectory in a Category 2 hurricane was mechanically impossible. The French commanders analyzed the risk parameters. The structural stress on the warships was approaching critical limits. They terminated the pursuit. They altered their coordinates and retreated to the safety of the island harbor. The colonial forces calculated that the prisoners were dead. No wooden vessel carrying an overloaded mass of 198 starving men could survive the sheer kinetic force of those waves. The mathematical probability of their survival shifted from 0 to absolute negative, but the system failed to quantify the human variable. The fleet of wooden boats was swallowed by the dark green walls of the ocean. The tow lines connecting the motorized canoes to the wooden boats snapped under the immense tensile strain. The flotilla scattered in the darkness. The thermodynamic nightmare subjected the prisoners to extreme physical trauma. The ambient temperature dropped drastically. Rainwater and freezing ocean spray constantly bombarded their exposed skin. Hypothermia began to systematically shut down their peripheral blood vessels. Their core body temperatures dropped below 35 degrees Celsius. The physiological threshold for survival was breached, but the mechanical output of their muscles did not stop. They deployed makeshift oars carved from the broken floorboards. They matched the brutal rhythm of the ocean. They initiated a continuous synchronized rowing sequence. They bailed out the hundreds of gallons of seawater, reaching below rails using their bare hands and empty ammunition boxes. They operated like a flawless biological engine. For 72 consecutive hours, they defied the laws of thermodynamics. They consumed 0 calories. They rested for 0 minutes. When the physical pain threatened to paralyze their nervous systems, they utilized acoustic resonance to maintain synchronization. They sang revolutionary anthems. The vibrations of their vocal cords unified their mechanical rowing strokes. The collective acoustic output overrode the sensory overload of the howling wind. They transformed sheer ideological willpower into kinetic energy. The storm raged for 3 complete diurnal cycles. The ocean current dragged them relentlessly toward the southwest. On the dawn of the 4th day, the kinetic violence of the sea began to decelerate. The atmospheric pressure stabilized. The dense fog broke. The physical collision between the battered wooden hulls and a soft, muddy surface signaled the end of the trajectory. The geographical coordinates registered as the dense mangrove forests of K Mal province. The physical distance covered exceeded 200 kilometers. The navigation relied on 0 mechanical instruments. The propulsion relied entirely on human muscle output, operating far below standard survival thresholds. The wooden boats embedded themselves into the coastal mud. The kinetic energy transfer dropped to 0. 198 biological entities ceased their continuous rowing motions. The physiological toll was mathematically staggering. Average body mass had decreased by an estimated 15% within 72 hours. Severe dehydration thickened their blood viscosity. Muscle fibers were torn on a microscopic level due to the unyielding mechanical strain. Yet the mortality rate of the crossing registered at absolute 0. The prisoners dragged their depleted physical masses over the wooden rails. They dropped into the shallow coastal water. Their bare feet made contact with the solid earth of the mainland. Their optical nerves registered the dense green foliage of the mainland vegetation. The saline concentration in their ocular fluid mixed with the rainwater. The tactile feedback of the soil triggered an immediate physiological release. Ant B.A. collapsed onto the muddy bank. He lowered his cranial structure. He pressed his lips against the wet dirt. A physical confirmation of their extracted coordinates. The local civilian defense units operating in the Con Dao sector visually detected the anomaly. They approached the landing zone. They observed the shattered wooden vessels. They registered the emaciated human figures wearing tattered colonial prison uniforms. The visual data processed by the local forces contradicted all established logic. Escaping the Con Dao penitentiary infrastructure was a documented impossibility.
Navigating a Category 2 tropical storm in overloaded wooden supply boats was a physical impossibility. The local militia immediately deployed medical and logistical support to stabilize the 198 survivors. The biometric recovery process commenced. The extraction protocol was officially complete. The system was permanently broken. The French colonial administration and Con Dao conducted a post-incident physical assessment. They quantified the structural damage at Ben Down. They audited the missing munitions. They recorded the loss of the naval transport vessels. The administrative reports attempted to rationalize the catastrophic failure. They blamed the meteorological anomaly. They blamed the structural limits of the wooden boats. They completely refused to acknowledge the fundamental mechanical flaw. The billion-dollar penitentiary infrastructure was equipped with the highest-grade industrial steel. It utilized advanced optical surveillance. It deployed naval warships capable of massive ballistic destruction. It fed on a continuous supply of financial and logistical resources. It was designed to crush human biology into total submission. The ultimate paradox of the December 12th operation was the weaponization of the system's own arrogance. A highly complex mechanical beast was completely paralyzed by the simplest physical variables. A rusty iron rod shaped against the stone floor. A rigid 20-minute lunch protocol dictated by the digestive cycle of the guards, a shift in the atmospheric pressure. The colonial forces built an impenetrable cage but handed the prisoners the master key through their own predictable operational loops. The French radar arrays scanned the empty horizon looking for ghosts that had already vanished. The maximum security grid was compromised beyond repair. The psychological barrier of the island fortress was permanently shattered. Steel and concrete can build an inescapable fortress, but blind arrogance will always leave the front door wide open.